Hi automotive enthusiasts, welcome to Cam and Crank, where today we dive into one of the most influential middleweight sport bikes of the early 2000s, the 2003 Honda CBR600RR. This machine wasn't just another addition to Honda's lineup. It was a statement piece pulled straight from the brand's cutting-edge MotoGP technology and placed squarely in the hands of everyday riders. Back then, the Supersport market was a battleground, with every manufacturer pushing harder, faster, and sharper in pursuit of dominance. Yet Honda chose a different path, betting not solely on raw horsepower, but on precision, agility, and the kind of control that could make any rider feel like a racer. That decision changed everything. Picture the early 2000s. Riders were obsessed with speed records. Magazine tests measured bragging rights in tenths of a second, and manufacturers funneled enormous resources into winning on Sunday to sell on Monday. But Honda, after returning to MotoGP with the all-conquering RC211V, decided to filter those lessons into a production middleweight that emphasized balance over sheer numbers. The 2003 CBR600RR emerged as the closest a consumer could get to a MotoGP-derived machine without a factory contract. This was not just another sport bike. It was a translation of elite racing philosophy for the street. The story we're exploring today isn't about just one model year. It's about how this bike reflected a cultural shift in supersports, how its engineering gambles paid off, and why its legacy continues to echo in the way sport bikes are designed 2 decades later. Across this journey, we'll look at the origins and decisions that brought the CBR600RR into existence, then dive deeper into the design choices that made it both a racer's tool and a weekend rider's dream. And finally, we'll examine the impact it left behind, how it forced rivals to rethink strategies, and how it still serves as a benchmark of rider-focused engineering. Whether you've ridden one, dreamed of owning one, or simply want to understand how one bike can shift the trajectory of an entire class, this is the story worth telling. Stick with us as we peel back the layers of engineering, culture, and competition that made the 2003 Honda CBR600RR not just another sport bike, but a defining moment in two-wheeled history. Get ready because precision has a story and it begins right here. The birth of the 2003 Honda CBR600RR didn't happen in a vacuum. It was born from an era of fierce competition, escalating expectations, and Honda's relentless pursuit of MotoGP supremacy. When the RC211V stormed into Grand Prix racing, it didn't just dominate, it rewrote the rules of how a motorcycle could be built. With mass centralization, a compact frame, and suspension designed for pinpoint precision, Honda's engineers faced the challenge of distilling that essence into a street-legal 600-class bike, a machine that had to satisfy racers and commuters alike. They weren't aiming to build just another middleweight. They were trying to bring professional-level precision into the hands of ordinary enthusiasts. That ambition shaped every decision, from the aluminum frame to the placement of the fuel tank, and it was the first time many riders experienced MotoGP thinking translated into daily riding. What looked like a gamble would soon prove to be a defining move. Micro-story. In one corner of Honda's design center in the early 2000s, engineers were staring down a question that kept surfacing. Could a 600-class bike be more than a horsepower contest? They looked at the RC211V and saw more than speed. They saw stability, agility, and trust between rider and machine. By centralizing weight and creating a compact chassis, they envisioned a bike that could carve corners with surgical precision. This vision wasn't about chasing bragging rights. It was about changing how riders felt when they leaned into a curve. And that became the DNA of the CBR600RR. Context digest. The 600cc class had always been a proving ground. These machines were small enough to be approachable, yet powerful enough to satisfy skilled riders. Manufacturers leaned into this sweet spot to capture both new enthusiasts and seasoned track day veterans. In the late 1990s, the Yamaha R6 and Kawasaki ZX6R were gunning for top-end power, while Suzuki's GSX R600 aimed for balance. Honda's CBR600F4i had loyal fans, but critics said it lacked the razor-sharp edge of its rivals. The stage was set for a transformation. Micro-story. Riders who first sat on the 2003 CBR600RR were immediately struck by its compactness. The bike felt smaller, tighter, almost like a race machine shrunk down for the street. Reviewers noted how the tank placement made the machine feel planted, how the suspension absorbed feedback without dulling the ride. On track, its stability through corners gave it an advantage not captured in spec sheet horsepower numbers. For riders, this was eye-opening, a machine that could make them better simply by trusting it. Context Digest. Honda wasn't alone in pulling inspiration from racing, but they went further than anyone else in translating MotoGP DNA. The Unit Pro-Link rear suspension, borrowed from the RC211V, eliminated a frame-mounted top shock mount, reducing vibration and improving traction mid-corner. Combined with a dual-stage fuel injection system, the CBR600RR delivered smooth power delivery instead of a sudden rush. In an era when competitors pushed harder and flashier horsepower figures, Honda quietly optimized the details that made the difference in lap times. Reflection bridge. This contrast between raw numbers and refined feel began to shape not just the CBR600RR's identity, but the conversation about what riders truly valued. And that conversation only grew louder as the bike faced its rivals head-on. Micro-story. At magazine shootouts in 2003, the CBR600RR didn't always post the highest peak numbers, but it consistently came out on top in handling categories. Testers praised how it flowed through sections of track, how confidence replaced hesitation, how lap times benefited from predictability. A Yamaha might win in a drag race, but the Honda owned the corners. This was no accident. Honda had deliberately built a machine that won in real-world riding conditions, not just in spec sheet wars. The gamble to focus on feel rather than flash started to pay dividends. Context Digest. The Supersport rivalry was as much about brand image as engineering. Riders chose machines that reflected their personalities. Yamaha's aggressiveness, Kawasaki's brute force, Suzuki's balanced consistency. Honda had historically been seen as safe and reliable, but not always thrilling. The 2003 CBR600RR challenged that perception, injecting excitement into the Honda brand while maintaining its reputation for refinement. Suddenly, Honda wasn't just the sensible choice, it was the sharp one. Micro-story. On the streets, riders felt that same thrill. The 600RR's compact ergonomics tucked them into the bike, making every ride feel immersive. Weekend riders who once felt nervous about leaning deep into corners found themselves carving smoothly, as though the bike anticipated their moves. For many, it was the first time they experienced what Honda engineers intended, a bond of trust between rider and machine. That trust became a selling point, winning fans who weren't interested in bragging rights but wanted to feel connected to their motorcycle. Reflection bridge. By putting rider confidence above peak horsepower, Honda shifted the terms of the Supersport debate. The impact rippled across the industry, and rivals had no choice but to take notice. The arrival of the 2003 CBR600RR was more than a product launch. It was a gauntlet thrown down in the middleweight class. Its MotoGP-inspired design proved that the heart of racing could beat in a street bike, and it made rivals rethink how they approached development. But the true test of Honda's gamble came not in design studios or shootouts. It came in the crucible of competition, where the CBR600RR would have to prove its worth on racetracks around the world. That's where the story intensifies. When the CBR600RR arrived at racetracks, its mission crystallized. Honda had promised MotoGP DNA in a street-legal package, but now it had to back up the claim under stopwatch scrutiny. Supersport championships were exploding in popularity, with manufacturers using them as marketing platforms to prove whose 600 was truly the best. The 2003 CBR600RR immediately showed that its design wasn't just clever, it was competitive. Racers discovered the same balance that street riders had praised: a planted chassis, predictable feedback, and a willingness to dive into corners without drama. In an environment where tenths of a second meant the difference between victory and anonymity, these traits mattered more than spec sheet horsepower. What Honda had done was create a tool that amplified skill, rewarding precision and punishing sloppiness. This was the identity of the CBR600RR, and it was about to leave its mark. Micro-story. At the AMA Supersport Championship, teams quickly realized that the CBR600RR gave them a unique edge. Riders could push harder into corners, confident the bike would hold the line. Mechanics praised how easily it could be tuned to suit different riding styles. In one memorable season, a privateer used the CBR600RR to challenge factory-backed competitors, proving that Honda's design worked even without massive budgets. The bike's success wasn't limited to elite teams. It democratized performance, showing that ordinary racers could compete with extraordinary results. Context Digest. The early 2000s were the golden era of supersport racing, with grids packed full of talent and rival manufacturers trading victories. Yamaha's R6 boasted screaming top-end power, Kawasaki's ZX6R delivered brute acceleration, and Suzuki's GSX R600 offered well-rounded consistency. But Honda's CBR600RR stood out for its race-derived balance. It wasn't always the flashiest on paper, yet its results spoke louder. Championships and podiums began stacking up, and soon the bike became a staple of racing paddocks worldwide. Microstory. For riders transitioning from amateur track days to semi-professional racing, the CBR600RR was a revelation. One racer recalled that switching from a different brand to the Honda felt like taking the training wheels off. Suddenly, lines that once felt unstable became smooth arcs, and mid-corner corrections were replaced by stability. These experiences weren't isolated. They represented a wave of riders discovering that Honda's focus on precision directly translated to faster lap times. Context Digest, Honda's racing program wasn't just about hardware. It was also about proving a philosophy. By emphasizing mass centralization, refined suspension, and predictable power delivery, the company argued that control and confidence were the ultimate performance factors. Competitors were forced to reconsider their strategies, leading to a subtle but significant shift in the Supersport arms race. No longer could manufacturers rely solely on horsepower figures. They had to address the total riding experience. Reflection bridge. That shift marked a turning point in how sport bikes were judged, with precision becoming as valuable as raw speed. And the ripple effects weren't limited to racetracks, they shaped the broader motorcycle culture. Microstory. On the streets of major cities, motorcycle meetups buzzed with conversations about the new Honda. Riders who once leaned toward Yamaha or Kawasaki found themselves swayed by tales of the CBR600RR's handling. Some described it as riding on rails, while others marveled at how it gave them confidence to push further. These grassroots endorsements carried weight, spreading the idea that Honda had created not just a fast bike, but a faithful companion for serious riders. Context Digest. The motorcycle press amplified these stories, with reviews highlighting the CBR600RR's unique ability to bridge track and street use. Unlike bikes that felt too aggressive for daily commutes, the Honda maintained livability while still excelling on weekends at the circuit. This versatility became a selling point, broadening its appeal beyond hardcore racers. Honda's decision to prioritize control over sheer numbers was validated not only in trophies but also in strong sales figures. Microstory. Dealerships reported an unusual trend. Customers who test rode the CBR600RR often canceled plans to buy competing models. The compact ergonomics, the way it disappeared beneath you, and the trust it inspired turned skeptics into loyalists. In some cases, riders upgraded earlier than planned, choosing to stretch budgets just to secure one. The buzz wasn't manufactured hype. It was word-of-mouth momentum built on genuine performance. Reflection bridge. By excelling in both competition and culture, the CBR600RR transcended its class, becoming more than just a motorcycle. It became a benchmark. But benchmarks invite challenges, and the legacy of the 2003 model would be defined not just by its victories, but by the ripple effects it left in the years that followed. The story of the CBR600RR doesn't end with its debut seasons. Its success reshaped the strategies of rivals, influenced the trajectory of the Supersport class, and left riders with a new standard of what a middleweight machine could achieve. The long-term impact of that shift carries us into the next chapter, where we explore how a single model year cemented itself as a legend in motorcycle history. As the years rolled on, the true weight of the 2003 Honda CBR600RR's influence became clear. This wasn't just a bike that won races and impressed reviewers. It reshaped how an entire segment was engineered, marketed, and remembered. Competitors could no longer ignore the lessons Honda had laid bare. That precision, balance, and rider trust were as crucial as sheer horsepower. Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki began refining their own approaches, adding elements of mass centralization, rethinking suspension geometry, and chasing not only speed, but usability. The middleweight class evolved into a proving ground not just for machines, but for philosophies of performance. The CBR600RR's debut year became a marker, a before and after moment in supersport history. Microstory. For one rider, the legacy of the 600RR wasn't just numbers or trophies. It was the confidence to push personal limits. A young track day enthusiast who once feared the unforgiving nature of sport bikes found the CBR600RR a partner rather than a beast. By 2005, that rider had advanced into amateur championships, crediting the Honda's forgiving stability for the courage to grow. Stories like these spread widely, highlighting how the bike empowered everyday enthusiasts to pursue goals they once thought unattainable. Context Digest. The 600 class would eventually face pressures from shifting consumer interests, economic downturns, and the rise of larger displacement machines. But in the mid-2000s, it was still the arena where reputations were forged. The CBR600RR didn't just win, it raised expectations for what buyers demanded. No longer could a bike rely on straight-line bragging rights. It had to inspire confidence in real-world conditions. The ripple effect of Honda's 2003 gamble could be traced in every new model year from competitors scrambling to match the formula. Micro story. In Europe, where Supersport racing carried immense cultural weight, the CBR600RR quickly became the backbone of many national series. Privateers who once struggled to keep pace suddenly found themselves competitive. The accessibility of performance meant that grids grew tighter, races more dramatic, and fan interest soared. Honda's influence extended beyond garages and dealerships. It shaped the very spectacle of racing itself, raising the entertainment value for crowds and broadcasters alike. Context Digest. MotoGP's trickle-down effect had been demonstrated before, but rarely so directly. By showing that top-tier racing innovations could enhance middleweight street bikes without alienating casual riders, Honda proved the value of technology transfer. This validation encouraged manufacturers to invest more in racing, knowing that their efforts could justify development costs through consumer sales. The 2003 CBR600RR became a business case as much as an engineering one, showing how racing success could be translated into everyday desirability. Reflection Bridge. In many ways, it wasn't just the motorcycle industry that learned from this machine. It was the culture surrounding it, from riders to fans to engineers chasing the next breakthrough. Micro story. As the decade progressed, the CBR600RR's reputation solidified. Owners began holding onto their bikes longer, treasuring them not just as transport, but as milestones in their personal journeys. Enthusiast forums buzzed with stories of first track days, unforgettable canyon rides, and the feeling of mastering a machine that seemed to anticipate every move. For many, the 2003 model year became a badge of honor, remembered not only for what it did technically, but for the emotions it stirred. Context Digest. By the late 2000s, the middleweight class began to contract as riders gravitated toward leader bikes and new categories like naked sport machines. Yet the 2003 CBR600RR retained an aura, respected even as the market shifted. It became a reference point in retrospectives, often described as the moment Honda proved that racing authenticity could live in a street bike without compromise. This dual identity, accessible yet elite, cemented its place as a legend. Micro story. Decades later, collectors and historians still return to the 2003 CBR600RR as a benchmark. Its design choices, from the unit Pro-Link suspension to the centralized mass philosophy, are studied not as relics, but as milestones in motorcycle evolution. Riders who grew up seeing posters of the bike now search for clean examples, treating them as investments in history as much as machines to ride. The legacy has transcended its original purpose, turning the 600RR into both a tool and a time capsule. Reflection Bridge. What began as an experiment in bringing MotoGP DNA to the street ultimately became a masterclass in how engineering, racing, and rider experience could merge into something timeless. The 2003 Honda CBR600RR left a mark far deeper than anyone predicted at launch. It shifted the balance of competition, redefined what riders valued in performance, and became a touchstone for generations that followed. Its story isn't just about motorcycles, it's about ambition, innovation, and the enduring bond between a rider and the machine that earns their trust. That is the true legacy of Honda's Supersport precision, and it remains as compelling today as it did over 2 decades ago. The journey through the 2003 Honda CBR600RR story brings us full circle, back to the moment when Honda dared to take MotoGP lessons and place them in a middleweight supersport. From the first spark of ambition Through the crucible of racing, to the legacy that endures today, this bike represents far more than just a machine. It is a snapshot of an era when the Supersport class was at its zenith, when riders demanded not just speed but connection, and when one manufacturer proved that precision could be as thrilling as raw power. The CBR600RR's introduction showed that Honda was willing to gamble its reputation on a new philosophy, and the payoff came not only in trophies but in trust. Over the course of our story, we've seen how the CBR600RR challenged conventions by shifting focus from horsepower to handling, how it dominated racetracks and reshaped the way riders experienced performance, and how it forced an entire industry to reconsider what mattered most. Along the way, we've uncovered the micro-stories of racers and everyday enthusiasts whose lives were touched by this motorcycle, and we've traced the context that made its debut such a pivotal moment. Each thread we've explored ties back to a single truth. The 2003 Honda CBR600RR was more than just a product launch. It was a statement of intent that continues to resonate. Today, the motorcycle world looks very different. Classes rise and fall, tastes shift, and technology leaps forward in ways few could have imagined back in 2003. Yet the CBR600RR's influence remains visible, not just in Honda's lineup but in the DNA of every sport bike that values balance as much as brute force. Its story is a reminder that true innovation isn't about chasing the loudest numbers, it's about rethinking what riders truly need and delivering it with elegance. For enthusiasts, whether you've owned one, ridden one, or simply admired it from afar, the 2003 CBR600RR stands as proof that motorcycles can embody both artistry and utility. It is a touchstone for how engineering can shape culture, how competition can refine design, and how one model year can echo across decades. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.